Karim Hirani. Hello again. Hello again, sir.
Hey, Kevin. Hello again
Good
as
to see
well.
you.
Good to see you.
We I think are still kind of in a nice crisp morning. Yeah, UK time.
So it's 11 o'clock. So yeah, nice. It's a sunny but cold day today. So it's a bit kind of bittersweet because it's freezing outside, but it looks really beautiful. So yeah, enjoying it from inside the house at the moment. Yeah.
Even though I live on the equator in Singapore, I am of Canadian extraction, as you know. So when a Brit says it's freezing outside, I just simply do not take them seriously.
You mock it. You mock it. I can see it in your eyes, Kevin. It's like you don't know what cold is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a cross between derision and contempt in my eyes when you say the word freezing.
I feel it across the Zoom waves. Honestly, you're right. And you're right. If I remembered just now that you're from Canada, I wouldn't have said that. I would have said it's warm. I've got nothing to complain about.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. My family and I are not going to go for the Christmas season. Like cowards, we were there in September and we'll be back in March. So
so stay away during.
I can only sort of lay tangential claim to this Canadian identity anymore.
Well, okay, but you could have come for a bit of winter sun in the UK and enjoyed the heat before going back.
That's right. Karim, let us talk about vertical development and leadership. I'm quite keen. I knew there was a topic we needed to return to, and this is that topic. And I think if you're good with it, let's just sort of jump in the river and go where the current leads.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Super.
And do you have an initial kind of burning question for the audience, or shall I just dive in with what I think might be useful?
I think just dive in. Yeah. Just dive in, and I'll catch up with you.
Cool. So I think probably the best place to start, just the term itself, so everyone knows what it means. What's vertical development? And there's a couple of really nice ways of talking about it, but in very simple terms, it's about how human beings evolve, and they go through these evolutions or stage of development. So like we know, and it's well documented now with child development, that you go through these stages. And, we know that when a baby's born, its perception of the world is it's all about me. It's very centered around my survival, safety. And as it grows, as you go to later years, it becomes about belonging and being part of the group. And what vertical development is about is kind of looking at those stages and what the research has found. And this goes back thousands of years, but also more recently with leadership at Harvard University as an example, or there's places in the UK that research this. These stages of development actually continue in your adulthood. So you don't just reach a point and go, okay, that's it. But your evolution grows, and how you look at the world changes. And like, if you think about children, a child at 0 or 1 will look at the world as I'm the center of it. Later on, it becomes about I'm part of my group. But these stages of development, these kind of massive worldview shifts that children experience, we also experience as adults too. So what's been documented is, what are those stages? How do they change? And a good reflective question for the audience here is if you think back to when you were 18 and graduated or finished school, and what was life to you at that point compared to maybe later on in life, 10, 20, 30 years later, and maybe something you want to think about, Kevin, what's your outlook like now compared to an 18-year-old? And you'll see a shift. I don't know if you want to give that a go, Kevin, putting you on the spot, or
no, let's go. Yeah, I'm game. Teach me.
Go for it. So think about when you came into your adult life, and what was life to you at that point. How did you look at the world?
Well, I think there is definitely this sort of intrepid quality. I don't think I had met with any like really sharp medical or health trials, and so there was a bulletproof feeling for one.
Yes. Yes. Right.
Uh, while there was sort of maybe a naive version of the sense like I could do anything, I don't think every 18-year-old feels that, but I certainly
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Maybe I now know that that was partly because I didn't understand a lot of things. So
Right.
so I had the sense like, oh, I could be an investment banker or a successful songwriter,
Yeah.
or a high like a trapeze
Yeah.
acrobat, and like there was some objective falsehood in some of those beliefs.
Yes. Nice.
But I maybe just didn't have like the contemplative tools to observe that they were false.
Right.
So maybe I had like an attraction to things because they had a veneer. I didn't understand them
Beautiful.
deeply, but therefore they weren't that intimidating to me.
Lovely. So you've just described one of the stages of development beautifully, which depending on which model you look at, but the one I often use is one that was it's called the Leadership Development Framework, which is an articulation of the vertical development model in leadership terms. But it's a stage where I can do anything. I believe I can fly, kind of, you know, it's kind of archetypally that song. And as you said, there's a veneer about it and there's an outward look about it. And, you know, the clues that you're giving about the shift is, you know, I didn't understand as much at that time, you know, and I hadn't, you know, which is another word for, you know, the maturing hadn't happened, yet there was an exuberance about it. It was an excitement, you know, and so that's a particular stage of development in the model, which happens around that time is often the case, especially in the West, you know, depending on different cultures. So tell me a little bit more now, Kevin, what's kind of, how do you look at the world now? What's shifted?
I think I sort of, I think I cherish the idea of being trusted or relied upon. I think there's a premium now in sort of like taking one's place in a formal seat, like a seat at the table, is something to be desired. Whereas 18-year-old me wouldn't have even thought there was a table or a seat, let alone any desirability to being in it.
Part of it, yeah.
Right. And certainly no sense of envy or desire to have taken some paths. I mean, others, yes, but there are whole categories which I would not have wanted to cut off at age 18, which I'm now very grateful and quite pleased that they were cut off at some point or another, even though they seemed attractive then.
Great. And tell me what's meaningful to you now. So you're talking about the seat at the table. I'm getting a sense of relationship feels more meaningful, having your own place within a system.
Yeah. So I'm 43, and I think it's a combination of my family. So, you know, I've got one son, he's 1 year and a couple of months. So that's very top of mind and present, and my wife. In terms of my career, it's this idea of just being relied upon and trusted and respected in what I do. So there was a transition there, which, by the way, I've seen in a number of professionals that we work with. They get to a certain stage and they just don't care how much money they make anymore. They really need what sort of social approbation. They need their fellows to look at them and say there's something respectable about the way you go about things. And then certainly in the last few years, like a turn to, or maybe in my case better, a return to spiritual or religious moorings.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, you've kind of just described, I think.
I played into your hands.
Yeah, and
Good.
we haven't prepared this in advance, but it,
good. I'm pleased.
And this kind of connects also to the why of the model, because the stage you're talking about, which happens later in life and around midlife, you know, is where there's this shift of, you know, actually the performance related identity doesn't matter so much because you've seen through it. Like, it didn't give you the thing that you wanted, or that external success doesn't give you the thing, which is what starts to touch into the spirituality. It's like, I know there's something here. You know, when you talk about trust, love in the family, it's kind of coming into yourself and what's important now. So there's a sense of the meaning's really shifted. And then, as you said, that the spirituality starts to emerge. Like, what matters starts to become more important to me. And classic midlife crisis, and I'm not saying you've had one, but often when I work with clients who've had midlife crisis, it is that transition of, I've realized I've got the house, I've got maybe the second house, I've done well, but it didn't matter, you know, it didn't mean much to me. And then you kind of come crashing down if you don't look at it early enough. And then what emerges is, you know, what's important to me, and the word that's often used is self-actualization. You know, you talk about respect and finding my seat. It's realizing who you really are, and it's about authenticity. So when you look at the stages of development, you've kind of you've shared an early one, and then one that's a couple of stages later. But what you'll notice as you describe, and as listeners are listening, the worldview is very different at each stage. And that's what this model is about, is that your worldview shifts over time and expands and grows and turns, you know, it becomes outward and inward, or there's more perspectives as you grow. And what the Harvard model looks at, for example, is what happens as that continues. And there are some far reaches of the research that's going on. And what's beautiful about it, just to kind of make this other point about it, is some of the research now maps to all the development theorists of our history. So people like, people would have heard of Piaget maybe, or Maslow. You know, these are development theorists, and the work is mapping to some of those people. It's mapping to some of the spiritual traditions. So some spiritual traditions have a development model, and they're mapping it to those as well, and recognizing this self-actualization stage you're talking about is quite a key one in our world right now. And it's that sense of what's important, you know, where climate becomes important more than my career progression, for example. You know, my family matters more than, you know, success at work. And a lovely other thing to say, just to kind of make this abstract thing a little bit more tangible, is to use a metaphor. It's like, if you think about the mobile phones, right? You've got upgrades of operating systems, and you have apps. You know, so at each stage of development, you know, so if you think about when you were 18, your apps would have been, you're learning new skills, you're learning new ways of, you know, you talked about gymnastics, or, you know, wanting to do different things in your career. Those are different skills or apps. And then vertical development is about upgrading the operating system, so that at each upgrade, your capacity for more apps is increased. You can hold more, there's no more perspective. Hopefully it gives you more choice, and hopefully gives you more connection as well as you go through those stages too. So yeah, it's a lovely way of looking at it. And so the models around vertical development are around, how do we kind of identify those upgrades, you know, and what are those significant upgrade points? And they're not necessarily one stage, you know, distinct at another at time. There is a continuity to it, but you can see some trends around these stages of development.
Mm-hmm. So you referenced Piaget and Maslow's self-actualization is his baby. And then, but you've referenced also the Harvard model. What is the Harvard model?
Yeah. So there's a model called the Leadership Development Framework, which actually was born in the UK actually, and this lady called Suzanne Cook-Reuter, who did a PhD at Harvard, I think over 20 years. She studied, this is why I like the model. She studied about, I think about 6,000 or 7,000 leaders. I mean, in the West, so there's that bias to it, just to name that, across UK and the US, and just looked at leaders, so thousands of leaders, and showed that these stages of development that had been identified did actually work in real with human beings. And so the model, and maybe one of the papers that's worth looking at if people want to go to it, is there's one in Harvard Business Review called The 7 Transformations of Leaders. And it describes those stages, or 7 stages, really well. And the reason why I refer to it is because of the ground of research that goes into it. You know, works with worked with real people, so it's got some good credibility behind it. But similar, to other models around vertical development, she's got her own language around it, but same principle of kind of these upgrades of operating systems that happen over the years.
7 stages. Shakespeare has 7 stages of man. From this is, I can't remember, the whole time you've been talking, I've been like, which play is that in? I think it's The Tempest. Anyway, he basically goes from infancy to when we're an old bent over, crooked over old man, and all the stages in between.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
But there's a reason. So I don't just say that to show off that like I remember a thing, but rather that this idea has been sort of haunting our species as long as we've been able to write.
Yeah, I had a page which, if you're up for it, I can share it on the screen, because just when you refer to Shakespeare, there's a bunch of development theorists, and I can share a slide for a second.
Show it.
Come up. Does that work? Okay. Because it just hopefully gives something, again, a visual to make this connection tangible. So I just see if I can. Yes, I've got access to screen share. So hopefully you should see this. This is from Ken Wilber, Integral Psychology. Worth a read if you like this stuff. He's quite academic in his writing, but this guy's just got this capacity to look at theorists over thousands of years and kind of connect what they're saying. And what we're connecting to in this model is here's different theorists. So Piaget here, and some people might have heard of Fowler, but what the model shows is each of these people have defined these stages of development. And Maslow, as you kind of talking to, as I mentioned earlier, also maps to this. So you'll see the self-actualization stage around here. Then there's that stage of self-esteem, which Kevin, you were talking about when you came out at 18. It's about, I can do anything in the world. And I can get whatever I want, make whatever I want happen, and there's a naivety in that, and there's a beauty in it at the same time. So you can also map Maslow into this. But what's nice about this model, and certainly if you go to the book, there's about, I don't know, 30 or 40 different models of development that are identified that show they kind of just define the stages differently with language, but essentially there's an overlap between all of these people across time. And some of the people they use are, hundreds of years old. There's a couple that are 1,000 years old, and essentially saying these development levels happen. So that gives you a kind of sense of the stages there.
So in your work, have you been accounting for people who seem to get stuck or stunted or stalled out in, let's say, a stage of immaturity relative to their age?
Yeah. So if in the work we do at BTS, big part of my role is in the leadership and coaching area, and so yes, people either get stuck or they're kind of really ripe for a change. And if the challenges, and if you look at leadership development, it's often around skills or apps, learn how to give good feedback. It doesn't address the expansion of capacity. So, I know in our last call, we talked about the book, which was about the research that we saw about worldview or mindset change, and it mapped to this model as well. So what we do at BTS is kind of adapt the coaching depending on what's showing up for the client. So if someone is in that stage, of self-esteem, and they want to, succeed, I'm not going to go and push them into a place of, well, you've got to be over there. That's not how, they'll just stop coaching, so you've got to be able to meet that. Coming to your point about stuckness. Yeah, sometimes there's this transition, and if that isn't met, and organizations aren't, generally good at going, hey, this person's in this kind of quite a tough period of change where they're kind of letting go of an old identity and developing into a new one. If you don't know about that, it can be quite a difficult period. But as a coach, if hey, this person's in transition, there are some great questions I can ask about hey, what do you need to let go of? Maybe you need to let go of I can achieve anything, or let go of the belief that outward success gives me, the happiness and fulfillment I want. If I can support that person through that stage and see what is emerging, what actually gives you happiness now, what is shifting for you, and invite them into the recognition that actually, just talking about your example, Kevin, because it's here, actually what's important is the seat at the table, family, respect. Great. How do you now make that happen for yourself? And often if you're not met there, the stuckness can be quite prolonged. And it can be difficult, it can be quite a crisis. And as I said, midlife crisis tends to be about the old value set of performance or doing well is now dying and it's not working anymore. And if you're not met there, it's a tough stuckness to be in. So so having a vertical development lens can be really helpful to go, okay, we know what's going on here, and this might support you around the shift. And it gives great relief to the client as well, because they're like, oh, okay, I'm normal for going through this. It's not me. It's okay.
I want to just ask you something that maybe come in at a perpendicular. You referenced leadership twice. I saw it on the page too, in at least one place. We've been exploring a theme with some authors and with some clients around the correlation of leadership to followership. So as somebody matriculates up these different ranks, and I see, some are numbered and some are named, and there's multiple models going on at once, seems like all in pursuit of the same thing.
Yeah.
With respect to leadership, something happens sometimes where people, they're developing, but they just lose their followership. They make a grave error, or maybe they actually change locations. So you see this when folks leave an organization.
Yes.
What were sort of an inbuilt group of followers maybe continue to have an interest in them, but they don't follow in that same vote of approval each day or week or something.
Yes.
Is there sort of an account for that, just the volume and the scale of followership?
Yeah, and interesting. So what comes to my mind, I haven't thought about it from that lens, but a couple of perspectives that come to me now is when there's a followership in the way you're talking about it now, it's often because there's an identification with what that person role models, and so the followers kind of go, I want that, and therefore follow the leader for that, in the hope of maybe achieving that. So you've got the gurus, and everyone goes, they're the best salesperson in the world, and these are the things they do, and we're going to listen to them, what they eat for breakfast, how they motivate themselves in the morning, and you get this kind of followership. I've seen that happen. And when that person then shifts their identity, so their value set changes, their what's important to them changes, the people who follow them will then go, hang on, that's not the person I thought they were, and can then lose the followership. And you can kind of go, I feel let down by this person, or there's a vulnerability there that they're now showing me, which for that follower isn't good. Like if I think about the self-esteem stage you were talking about, the tendency is to follow other people who've got it perfect. They're the ones who have got it going on, and I want to be like them. And suddenly, if there's a shift for that leader, which tends to be around being a bit more vulnerable, a bit more humble, if they make that shift, the follower is not going to appreciate that type of leadership, because that's not what's important to them. So you do get a loss of followership, but then maybe a different followership if you're in a leadership position of people who admire that set of values, and these followers will then go, well, I need to find someone else who can speak to me in that way. And some may change with the leader. Some may go, wow, I'm going through that shift myself. I see it. And some, I imagine some will just leave and go, this is not working for me anymore, and I get angry with the leader because they've let them down. Does that resonate in the kind of questions you're asking yourself around it?
My brother had this funny story about our neighbor Alan. Our neighbor Alan was a fellow who would smoke a pipe out on his front step, and it smelled so good in the summertime. And I remember Andrew telling me this story. He was like, I went over there one time. I was like, oh, Alan, I'm really interested in getting into smoking a pipe. And he was just like, I don't smoke a pipe anymore, and neither should you. And it was sort of this like, wait, what? I got a pipe because it's so cool. But I think what had happened was probably Alan was in his 30s or 40s. I don't know.
Yeah.
To us, he was just a sage old man.
Yeah.
And so Andrew had just sort of followed the model.
Yes.
But actually the model changed right at the time when Andrew had picked up the idea.
Brilliant.
I'm going to do this too.
Yes.
And that was maybe an example of what you were just illustrating.
I think it's a great example. Yeah, exactly. What he admired at the beginning, or what he admired, and you mentioned the word cool. There was something about the value of coolness. There was something about this guy's cool, and therefore he's doing something that reflects that. And I want to become that, so I'll learn how to do that cool thing, so I can become that. And now he's changed, and so like, oh, okay, that's let me down. I need to now go find someone else who's going to help me to be cool.
The sort of beautiful full circle of that was that my brother told me that story sometime after, and we were admiring the fact that this fellow had changed, and it was a real anticlimax for Andrew at the moment. But
Yes.
later we thought, that's actually quite a boss move to be able to say, like, my example was a bad one and I've got a new one for you. So it's like, well, should I follow you or not?
Yeah.
Like follow new me.
Brilliant. And I think that's what happens if the leader changes. Some followers will go, wow, great, let's follow that. And some will go, okay, that model doesn't work for me. I'm going to find another replacement of you. I'm not ready to make that shift myself. Which is normal. Like, people in their own stage of development, some will be ready to shift, some are not. And so they'll find the role model that reflects where they are as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good example of that one, actually. Nice, simple, but to the point.
How have you organized the manuscript, the actual text of the book? I'm more and more interested in that because the kinds of ideas that you're sharing, you could have written a huge, like, medical sized textbook or or a series of volumes. How have you organized it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a truth to that last point about volumes. It's initially, well, we've got a 2-book contract. We're actually just talking about the second one now. But the initial one was more focused on the earlier stage of development that we see, and we do in the book. So how we've organized it actually is, let's just talk about the art and science of worldview change, and whether you're at an early stage of development or an advanced one, there are some key elements that support change. And I can just give a bit of voice to that now while I'm talking about it, and I'll come back to the organization. But at each stage, there's firstly, there's a letting go and a opening up to a new. So letting go of an old, opening up to a new. And how you do that is through disrupting yourself by exposing some of the self-talk. So again, if I just use the example you gave, there's a period of time where you go, actually, that belief system that says happiness comes from outside success, you disrupt that model. And it could be through life events. It sounds like there might have been a few that have contributed to that, that then disrupt that perspective. And so you disrupt, then you get some shifting and hopefully some support if you have a coach or a senior figure in your life or someone who can mentor you that helps you to make that shift. And then you embed the new worldview. So the first part of the book, if I come back to the organization, is about worldview change and how do we shift. There's lots of I suppose there's 2 other bits that are relevant around organization. What we've also noticed is that the way we've organized it is that there are 4 areas that we see people shift in. So one is in their being, one is in how they relate, one is around their sense of meaning or sense of values, I'd say, and purpose. And then the other one is their capacity to think in complexity. And okay, without getting too complicated, they all have this kind of vertical developmentness to it. So that's what the first book is talking about, the first stage of that development, or an earlier stage that we see a lot, where, anything from 60 to 70% of leaders that we coached were working in that space. So that's how we've organized this first book. And it comes from our research with coaching leaders and seeing these stages of development coming up. So very simply, it's about worldview change and that first shift, and how do you shift worldview? And I think the second book is then going to be a little bit more on the more later stages of development around the actualization. Although in this book, we do talk about it in the last 2 chapters a little bit, just to give people a sense of what those later stages are about, but at a very light touch level.
Capacity.
Yeah.
What I caught that word a couple of times.
Yeah.
So what's the, let me double click it.
Yeah, so let's open that one up. So capacity is another way of describing what shifts at each stage of development. So your capacity or the operating system upgrade has more capacity. So each stage of development increases capacity. So you can hold more, you can see more, you can experience more perspectives. And again, if I just go back to what everyone can relate to, child development, the capacity is very little. It's about, I'm just thinking about my food and what I need right now in this moment, and it's all about me. So one perspective. As you evolve, all of those capacity shifts. How I can hold more because I can see there's a mother and a me, so I've got more capacity for relationship. I can sometimes manage being hungry for a little while rather than go straight into reactivities. There's more capacity to manage my feelings and reactivity. And as you grow older, hopefully you can, you don't see people screaming when they're not getting food within 2 minutes at the restaurant. There's a capacity to hold those emotions, hold other perspectives in relationships. So if someone's disagreeing with you, you don't go into reaction. You kind of go, oh, I have a capacity to listen to your perspective and be changed by it. So yeah, capacity is another word for describing the stage of development. Each stage is an increase in capacity. And therefore, with more capacity, you can put more in. So more apps, more skills, more capabilities in there, as well as more experience. You can experience more things when you've got more skills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there an account for a turn in capacity? As people get to a certain age or stage, it's like you see some diminution.
Yeah, good question. Oh, you're asking some very pertinent questions. So 2 things about diminution in capacity. One is that I've talked quite a lot about the individual's vertical development stages. So what I would say is your context also facilitates which capacity you're accessing. So to give you an example, if you go, I went into the banking sector 2-3 years back. We did a big project, and I remember my capacity went back to that place of I've got to prove myself, I've got to show I'm the best. Suddenly I'm suddenly exhibiting a capacity from an older development stage. So environment has an impact on capacity. And so in terms of diminishing, sometimes they call them wormholes, that if you put in a context, if you starve yourself for 3 days, you're going to go into survival mode to a very early stage, and you will probably be quite close to that 1-year-old. So capacity can diminish based on context, number one. And number two, as the brain deteriorates, and we know in certain diseases as you get older, the capacity of the brain to function well reduces, and therefore, there's a diminishing there. But generally, a healthy brain, the capacity increases. And in fact, this model's kind of been mapped to the levels of the brain as well. There's a lot of complexity happening in brain research right now, but the number of interconnections increases as you move up. But with healthy brains, and of course, as brains get less healthy and as you grow old, capacity diminishes as well. But I'd say, on a day-to-day level, capacity diminishes, due to context as well, or triggers. You get triggered and suddenly you're going back to that angry 5-year-old that doesn't like it. And each time you work it, hopefully you kind of bring your capacity back again, and hopefully with a bit more growth in the process as well.
Let me take you down another avenue then, relating. So you gave me 4. One was relating.
Yeah, great. Let me make that real, actually. We've talked nice and theoretical, I hope. Yeah, so maybe if I talk about relating with an example and what it might look like at different stages of development, would that help, Kevin, around making? So yeah, it's a great example. So let's start with early, because I've got a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old, so I can. They're at different stages, and the scientific part of me is observing them as well as being a dad, hopefully. But when my 7-year-old fights at a very early stage of development, and I'll just give a little bit of theory along the way. It still is quite me-centered. It's there is a little bit of room for 2 perspectives. But if she goes into a disagreement, it's like, I'm right, you're wrong, blame. She'll snitch on her to me, snitch on the other sister. And if you look at it in an organizational context, you do get leaders who haven't matured much past that worldview. It'll be very blamey. So if there's in relationship, if I talk about conflict, in relationship, it's your fault, not mine. My point of view is right, and I'm going to prove you wrong, potentially shame you at this very early stage of development. So relationships and conflict is a good way of kind of describing these stages. And generally relationships, there's not a ton of intimacy very easily at that stage of development. But if I stay with conflict and relationship, it's a good way of explaining the model. As you grow, so the next stage of development is to start to really recognize there are 2 points of view. So you start to go, okay, from me to there is another perspective, and you start to. So what I'm teaching this 7-year-old is, come back and remember, she's kind of learning this, that your sister has a perspective too, and the way it looks like is just help her to calm down, so that kind of triggered brain relaxes and kind of go, why do you think your older sister did that? And she'll start to go, okay, maybe get an apology out of her. So that's the next stage of development. And so as in an organizational context, if I'm coaching around this, I really am helping them to go, there's another way of looking at this. The next stage, and I'm not using the language of the vertical development, but just stay with the process, is genuinely be able to step into the world of the other. So I suddenly go, oh, okay, now I see why they feel that way. Now I see why they talk to me like that. Oh, okay, I get it. I feel their pain. I understand their drive. I understand their motivation. It's the capacity to listen. Now, if you think about it in an organizational context, if you've got people who can do that, conflict gets resolved a lot more easily. And there's a lot more peace and hopefully learning and growth that can happen. Now, this is where it gets interesting. That tends to be around the self-esteem, and moving into that kind of beginnings of the self-actualization where I can step into the other world. And then there's the next stage, and this is where it gets really interesting. So there's a conflict. The next stage of development starts to go, hey, what's the co-creation of this conflict that I'm participating in? So, my direct report's coming in late to work. When the relationship conflict is at an earlier stage, it'll be their fault, they're wrong, correct them. Okay, then you evolve and you go, okay, the next stage is let me understand their world and have a chat about it. At more advanced stages, what am I doing, or what's my participation in this? Maybe I'm not engaging them in their work. Maybe there's a sense of missing purpose. Maybe they're not connected to their work. Maybe there's something going on in life outside of work that I haven't engaged them in a conversation. So suddenly I'm not going, it's just their world. It's what am I co-creating here with them? And then the dialogue is so different. It's instead of I'll just understand you, I'll also then own my part to play in it. And let's then change so that suddenly it shifts from understanding to dialogue and hopefully transformation in the relationship. So you'd have a very different quality conversation. As that expands, one more step I'll go, but there's a few more you could go, but this is getting quite advanced. And you can go into the witness of the observer. And there's 2 things that can happen here. So one is you can start to go, wow, me and this person, I can see what we're doing, I can see the game, and I can see the collusion that we're playing. And therefore I can see a resolution much more faster and hopefully move through it. Even more powerfully though, you can go, and what happens between us is also happening in our system, so we've got to prove a culture in our system, so now you're expanding to what's happening here is a reflection. So this person's late because they've got pressure and targets. The business doesn't care about their family life. So this person's now reacting by turning up late. So you suddenly start to go, what's happening here is a function of something bigger, and how do I include that in my understanding? So now your conflict is more of a, what's the learning here, as opposed to this is something that needs to be stopped, to what's the shift that needs to happen in this system for this person, and through this relationship, maybe there's something that can shift in the system and vice versa.
Wow.
Potentially as well. Yeah. So there you get a sense of,
I am very glad that I asked you that question. There's I was looking for one Easter egg and you just opened a whole basket full there. Yeah, that is fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
Even as you said, it has great echoes with some of the most influential classical writings, and also some of the other just truths that you see in certain narrow areas of professional development.
Beautiful. I'd love to hear some of the connections that it sounds like that you're having some light bulbs go off around different.
We have a principle that we teach. It's sort of an advanced sales principle when you do business to business sales for professional services in particular.
Yeah.
Called the stripy jersey. So the stripy jersey is basically that rather than me selling to you and you buying from me, and the artifices that exist around that, where you're like you demur on certain things and I pretend not to be coming on too strong, but I still know I have to, and all this other kind of pageantry. We actually say, look, you're not going to wear a red jersey and I won't wear a blue one.
Yeah.
Let's both agree that my organization is trying to sell things to you and your organization is needing to buy things from me or someone else. We'll both don stripy jerseys like referees and stand on the side and go, what would ideally take place here? And you can sort of have a meta conversation about things.
Right.
And it's beautiful because you end up being able to communicate all the things that you want to. Brilliant. In a way like this, Karim, you go, what I recommend you explain to your people is X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And then they can also say to you, like, I see that there will be a challenge with carrying a message like that back to my camp. If your camp can sort of adjust its expectations for the way we're thinking about this, it looks like this and this. Wow. Just the exercise of saying, like, it's stripy jerseys on for just a bit. Maybe we'll go back to wearing our colored tees, but for now, it's the stripy jersey principle. Wow. Amazing. But you can see why I could see that in your description.
Beautiful. I love that. I mean, what I notice because BTS got a big element of helping people with sales, and we're noticing there's this real shift of in sales of partner relationship, and what you're describing is quite an advanced vertical development shift, and being able to take your identity off and go, right, you're not going to play your buyer identity, I'm not going to play my sales identity, but it's there. But let's partner together and then talk about it, so you're coming off your identity and talking about, that's exactly I think you're spot on to make the connection. And something shifts around, being, at least from my experience of working with the sales people here, is a relationship builds of how do we serve you, how do we support a mutual benefit here. Of course we're going to make money out of it, that's my sales jersey. And of course, you're going to benefit from the product. But now we've got a relationship that's in service to that. And I'm not trying to push something onto you, nor you trying to get the best out of, milk me for every penny. It's a really different way of relating, which is part of that kind of vertical development shift. Suddenly, it's not from identity, it's from a relational place, which, exactly that. And the meta place, it's that other perspective that isn't identified, and therefore more can happen. Great connections.
You must, when you bring this stuff up with people, does it just go like wildfire? I just feel like it must, like, I just can't imagine anybody not being interested, at least from a selfish perspective,
Yes, yeah.
in this field of study.
Yeah, especially Kevin, I think the stage you've described where you're at, that's the stage where the wildfire gets the most roaring, because the capability to make sense of your experience is quite high, and suddenly you're able to look back and go, wow. Like if I share it with someone who's not it's quite early, you know, if I'm coaching someone who's quite early in their maturity place, they're like, sounds good, but tell me how do I get my next promotion? Tell me, how do I get that next big fat bonus? You know, and so it's not interesting, but it becomes interesting as you move up the stages. So I always bring this model in to leaders I coach when they're at this stage, or at the stage of the kind of moving out of self-esteem to the next stages. And it almost feels like at times it's a must, because it helps them to make sense of the world so much. And yeah, amazing. It's amazing. It's a huge relief. It's huge excitement. It's a huge sense of possibility, but also a sense of it touches the heart. And as you said, there's a kind of spirituality to it. When you look at some of those advanced stages, you know, Maslow's self-actualization, he then talks about self-transcendence, that there is a kind of expanding into what is beyond your ego, which is what the early stages are. They're about ego development, which is important, right? I need to develop my ego so I can live in the world. But as you start to let go of that, you take off the jersey of that ego, something else happens. There's relationship, there's being, there's meeting, and there's a spirituality to that starts to bring a sense of excitement too. So that's also part of the fire, I think, is people start to turn to something quite deep and meaningful in that. But yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a very selfish question on our behalf, because I'm taking this in and sort of enjoying the learning.
Mm-hmm.
We build academies for our clients, you know, for companies.
Yeah.
And one of the things we obviously see is that there's always a discussion around the cohort, right?
Yeah.
We're going to take on a cohort. Well, what are they? Are they 2 years experience? Are they senior partners? You know, is it the whole international cohort at that level, or what? Is it blended?
Yeah.
That makes a big difference in the way that you approach from a teach and learn perspective. It seems to me, based on what you're sharing, that actually a good form for an internal academy would be layer cake. You'd be like at you could match it to your stages of development and just say, look, if you're trying to teach 22-year-olds about how to have fruitful, virtue-driven, long-term relationships with their clients, you're just you know, gonna fail. It's not gonna hit them where they're at. They're going to wonder how they can make a little bit of money and stick a little bit of experience on the resume, or what have you. And actually, that's quite appropriate for being 22.
Yeah, spot on. Yes, I think. Let me wait for you to ask the selfish question, or if you said
That's it. That's it.
Yeah,
If you were to organize an academy for just imagine an organization called Acme, and they say, Karim, what do we do about organizing our internal academy based on what you've taught us? I think, if I'm right, you actually do it according to the stages.
We've done that, Kevin. I think, you know, so as an example, like if I think about there's sales as a discipline, there's coaching as a discipline, you know, but for both, there's the development stages apply. So I can share what we did in coaching. You know, when we trained our coaches, we did say, hey, you got to do vertical development, and we trained them all. Because in coaching, you meet different stages of development, and you have to adapt, you know, your style. And so an academy would have to, thankfully, we bring in a lot of coaches who are, you know, have gone through that kind of meaning, purpose, place, and are, you know, so we know how to select those for coaching. But when it comes to coaching skills, we've gone, hey, for each of these stages of development, it's a different set of skills. And then how do you meet the person where they are? And just to say, in terms of age, there are some younger people who are showing very high signs of being very mature. So how do you provide the right stimulus for the right development level? I think is, for me, having an academy that allows for those stages of development to be met. And you're right, if someone is in for the, I'm in it for the promotion, to get the career, want to get the house. You're not, virtues and meaning, not going to be too interesting. And so but that's brilliant. I mean, one of the article that I mentioned, the Harvard Business Review article, what they talk about is having the right leader at the right place. And I'd say that it's the right development for the right place as well.
Yes.
So you don't want a 5-year-old driving a complex car, and the 5-year-old needs to learn to ride a bike first, and no good teaching them a car. So how do you continue that? Let's meet people where they're at for their maturity and be okay with that. And as people evolve, we can meet them there. And suddenly, when sales is more about how do I serve society, humanity, okay, great, we can meet you there too. Whereas when sales is about, hey, want to get that bottom line, great. And if you've got someone who's hungry in that place, put them in the right place, because they will generate revenue, in an unreal way for you because they're so hungry. But then you want to support that, Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah. So yes, simple answer is, I think any academy has to have, my personal view, just to give you a personal point of view, I think if you haven't thought about that, the needs of vertical development, and as I said, a lot of development programs focus on, here's the one world view, and we're just going to teach you a bunch of skills around it. And it depends on, the quality of development of the organization. You miss out on a lot of people's needs in that training, and what they might be really hungry for to motivate them. So yeah, I would be thinking about, how do I bring in these different perspectives in the training so that we can really meet the different people, and then you can turn people's fire on at different levels of development that they're at, which I think will have a huge impact on growth, revenue, but even satisfaction and meaning, for the organization as well.
Wow. Really, really, really interesting. Worldview, by the way, that just sounds so grand a term. I take that to embody and encompass all their religious views, their political views, the lot. So what is the sort of technical function of the word worldview in what you're writing and studying?
Yeah, good question. So let me first just start with what I mean by worldview. It's my perception of the world, which is not just mental. It's also emotional. It's physiological. It's my outlook. And of course, as a human being, we're complex. Like, we don't just have one worldview, but there's a kind of general center of gravity. And if I go back to the example at the beginning that you shared, Kevin, at 18, there was a different way of what I thought the world was. And it was about, being the best I can be. There was a sense of, I can achieve what I want. I want to be great at this. And now it's really shifted. And I think what's tricky about worldview, when you're in it, it's hard to go, this is my worldview, because you're in it. But if you look at 18 and now, you can go, wow, that's dramatically different. And that's what this model tries to do. So that's kind of one thing I'd say about worldview. It is massive. For a lot of people, certainly the education system kind of aims for a worldview where life is about, making sure I'm meeting my self-esteem needs. Generally, that's the worldview that society is at, from an education point of view, in the West at least, and I speak from that lens. I know we've got multiple cultures here, but a bit more steeped in that one being in the UK. And to add one more kind of complexity to the mix, which is also getting interesting in terms of research, is different aspects of us could have different worldviews. So let me just make this really simple for now. This comes back to the, if I go to the relationship example, there are some people who are really great and very vertically developed from a relational perspective, but maybe really low in the capacity of complexity. So you might find this, say, in HR, where I'm very mature in my ability to understand people, to care for people, to be able to work through conflicts, but I might not be great at business strategy, business acumen, especially in the complexity of the world we're in. And vice versa, like you might get your CEO who's really good at the growth and the complexity and how do we win in the market today, but may completely have a very low intelligence or vertical development in emotion or relationship. So you might, what are these, forget about people, we need to get the strategy right. And so what's coming up in the research is that different lines of intelligence follow this vertical development model. So in our research at BTS, we talked about there's a relationship line. So some people might be really high on the relationship line, but on the being line, like how do I manage myself and my state, might be low. Or I might be good at relationship, but I might not be connected to my values. Or as I said, I might be great at relationship, but not very good at my capacity to think strategically with business acumen, with that sense of stepping back and taking a more broader business perspective. So yeah, another spanner in the works of development. So we have this multiplicity of what develops, and there's a general center of gravity, which is how I just look at the world as well. So there is a truth to that too.
Yeah. So
Wow.
cool. We are going to
Yeah.
We are going to order the books, I think in some volume, and get them out to a few clients here, so that folks in our geographic patch of the world can digest this a bit. But I can just, as you teach it to me here and take me through it, the applications just seem so obvious, particularly in the professional services world, particularly as it applies to how people embody the role of teacher and learner, which are the two roles that we care about most in organizations.
Yes.
And we'll go en premiere purchase for the one that's yet to come.
Yeah, brilliant.
You've got one fresh volume out and one.
So the one that's out is for Greatest Coaching Conversations, and it's done with a lens of leader as coach. So how do you coach? And it talks about the vertical development levels in there. What I'd say about the book is it's got a lot of practices that support vertical development. So if you get the book, don't do it as I'll read it and I'll grow. Work the exercises. They're designed to shift the worldview, and it's got a lot of our worldview shifting technology in there that we've used in coaching leaders. So use it for yourself as a leader. The other thing that's really interesting is, as a salesperson or a sales leader, how you position your sales conversation. If you can identify your clients' kind of worldview, it's really interesting.
Yes.
Someone's into self-esteem, this will make you look good, get your next promotion. If it's someone who's interested in self-actualization, this will give you meaning. This will give you, what you've been looking for, as opposed to someone who's, in the belonging stage. If I use Maslow, this will help you to be welcomed and recognized by your group, and you'll feel, so when you could talk to their development level, their motivation level, that can be a huge impact. And sometimes we mismatch it. We might talk about self-actualization because we're in that place, but actually the person's in self-esteem. You're not going to talk to them. You're going to talk to So that's also a place that's really interesting from a sales perspective. And I did this with our sales team. It was brilliant because we then said, if you're meeting this person, what would your pitch be? And it was a bit like taking the jersey off and going, okay, take your jersey off, wear those for a little while, and then how would you speak to them? And it was fascinating to see what creativity comes when you can do that. So yes,
it's gonna. I'm certain it would have just like profound implications for hiring and interviewing as well.
Yes. Yeah. So and that's they use that. I mean, I know one of the global oil and gas companies, they use vertical development as a vehicle to identify both their talent strategy, but their recruitment strategy within that. Because then, and putting the right people in the right place, like, if someone who's in that self-esteem place, they can drive that car fast, but you want to put them in the place of driving the car fast, not running a business where you've got to think about people, planet, profit. You've got to then be a bit more considered and broader. So they use that model. It can be very profound in helping you to make the right decisions and put the right people in the right place with the right capacities. Yeah.
Wow. Really compelling stuff, and wisely communicated. So I'm so glad we made sure we got on one another's docket again for a conversation. That's very cool. We're gonna chase it up into the new year, Karim.
Yeah, beautiful. Great. It's been a
Very
real pleasure
good.
to come back. Yeah, and
Yeah, indeed, indeed. How would you like folks who will listen to this and see it? Should we steer them any way differently than we did last time, or do you just want to kind of give a recap to that? Do you want to go to BTS, to your own website, to Amazon to get the book? What? Give them
yeah, I mean, yeah, from last time we yeah, I think it'll be similar. I mean, where my heart is that there's a lot of good stuff on vertical development on a Google search. You can, you've seen the Ken Wilber reference that I made earlier. He's someone who works more on the human stages as opposed to leadership development, but same stages. So direct people to there. Where my heart is, I know how important it is for people to include that development in their leadership, in their roles in life. So you're not just developing skills, you're also expanding capacity as well. So yeah, read the book for that, because it's got practices in there. Engage, someone who's mature. That's one of the most powerful ways of working with vertical development. Someone who's got got a maturity level above, that can really help to expand your own perspective. And each stage is beautiful. My 3-year-old is as beautiful as my 7-year-old now is beautiful as my 13-year-old. So how do you fully engage in the perspective you're in, and know when it's time to shift, you can be met there as well? So what do people do? Yeah, for me, just enjoy life through reading this stuff. And if you want to look more about how we do it in coaching, yeah, go to bts.com and you'll see more about us there.